I'm Fernando Guerra, Professor and Director of the Center for the Study of Los Angeles at Loyola Marymount University and moderator of the Center's Urban Lecture Series. This year marks the culmination of several important events for our city. In addition to this being the 10th annual lecture series the Center has organized, it's also the university's 100th anniversary of serving Los Angeles with its educational experience. Also this year, the city will remember the tragedy of the 1992 riots that occurred 20 years ago. As Angelenos, we should not forget both the physical and emotional scars these disturbances had on our city. For this reason, the Center for the Study of LA is sponsoring a survey of Los Angeles residents and their attitudes and opinions over the last 20 years. This survey will assist our faculty, students, and policymakers to better understand Los Angeles. Since no picture is complete without looking at the past, present, and future, the topic of this year's lecture series is 20 years after the riots, where is LA now? Where we hear from several of the city's current leaders, as well as those running for mayor of Los Angeles in the 2013 election. The series is important for several reasons. It provides an interdisciplinary education to hundreds of students at Loyola Marymount University, and it brings together top government officials, business and community leaders, and students, and the general public to discuss pressing issues facing Los Angeles and solutions to the city's problems. We hope you enjoy today's panel. For more information about the Center for the Study of LA, its research studies, or upcoming panels, please visit our website at www.lmu.edu/CSLA. Welcome to Loyola Marymount University. I'm Fernando Guerra, Director of the Center for the Study of Los Angeles and Professor of Political Science. This is the Urban Lecture Series, the 10th year we've been doing this. This is also the 100th anniversary of Loyola Marymount University serving Los Angeles. In addition, in 1992, we had the riots, and that was 20 years ago. To talk about the city of Los Angeles, the riots maybe 20 years later, and his mayoral candidate, we have our guest today, who is Austin Beutner. Just a little bit about Austin Beutner, just some of the highlights. He grew up in Michigan, graduated from an Ivy League school, Dartmouth, worked in Wall Street, worked for the Clinton State Department in Russia. Afterwards, he started his own investment banking firm. Was it headquartered here in Los Angeles?
Yeah, New York, Los Angeles, around the world.
I think it was called, or is called, Evercore. Yep. After a serious cycling accident, which we're going to talk about, he took a different path and started with the public sector and worked with Antonio Villaraigosa as first deputy for economic development, then the head of the DWP. And while he was first deputy, he also was in charge of, I believe, about 13 departments, and we're going to talk about that. He worked for 15 months in the administration at $1 a year. So 15 months, that means you got paid $1.25 for the 15 months.
I'm still waiting for the check, but okay. Yeah, that was what was supposed to be $1.
And of course, he's now running for mayor of Los Angeles. So welcome to Loyola Marymount University. And why are you running for mayor?
You know, for me, I'm pretty lucky. I am, in many respects, the American dream. My dad came to this country as an immigrant. My mom was a teacher. I benefited from a good public education and work along the way. And I've been fortunate in my life, and I'd like to give back, make a difference, and see if I can help Los Angeles provide better education, more opportunity for work for those who live here.
But why not Congress, U.S. Senate, or county, or school board? Why mayor of L.A., or why not start off first as a council member?
You know, I think the great challenges are in cities. Los Angeles is a city-state. Look at where Los Angeles is today versus 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. I think we need to go in a different direction. And I think the experiences I've had along the way and the people I can bring to the city can make Los Angeles a great city of the 21st century with everything we have here.
When you think about one of your main tasks when you were working for Mayor Villaraigosa was about jobs and jobs creations. But when you think about jobs, isn't it the federal policy and state policy that much more greatly impacts job creation? What can the city do in general, and what can a mayor do to increase job creation?
Sure. You know, I think clearly what the federal government does and the Federal Reserve do set the table. But Californians, Angelenos, have unemployment 5 or 10 points higher than the national average. So there's something else in the mix that we're doing. I'm a fan of Mike Bloomberg's. I follow what they do in New York, and I think in a decade he's made a remarkable difference.
Bloomberg is the mayor of New York.
Mayor of New York. Yeah. Look at what they just did with Cornell. They took a little used piece of city land called Roosevelt Island. They invited Cornell to come in and spend $500 million, build a bioscience center. In the bioscience center, they're going to employ white-coated PhDs, construction workers to build it, high school grads will get internships there. Many spin-off businesses will create jobs. It's the future. It's leaning forward. In Los Angeles, just a few short years ago, not too far from here, USC bought a hospital, went to local government and said, we'd like to build a bioscience center. They were told no. Now, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know where all the jobs are going to come from, but New York, to me, sounds like a city that's leaning forward, trying to create those opportunities in the city. Los Angeles, boy, if we say no to USC, we say no to LMU and all the great things that can come from it, I think they're going to do better than we are.
And so when you think about becoming mayor, I mean, you're a multimillionaire and you can do all kinds of different things. You can be involved in philanthropy, which you are. I think you're the chair of the board of the CalArts.
Yep.
And a variety of different other organizations, too numerous to mention. But you can get involved in all kinds of other ways. So just to put it out there, how rich are you? Are you like Bloomberg rich, Romney rich, Richard Riordan rich? Where in that scale are you?
You know, I've been fortunate. I started with nothing. Through hard work and some good fortune, I'm able to provide for my kids, make a difference in the community through other things I do in service organizations, and give back. I think everybody should have that opportunity to earn their way to good fortune. And I've been very, very fortunate.
So you don't have to work anymore?
I don't have to work, I have choice. You know, I came back to public service. I retired from my business at Evercore when I broke my neck cycling. I had a bad mountain biking
Tell
accident.
the audience and the students about that cycling, what happened?
Yeah, so Santa Monica Mountain's not too far from here. I actually bike. This morning I biked from my home. I live in the Palisades. So I was up in the mountains, and next thing I woke up and sitting there in the trauma center at UCLA with no blood pressure, and lots of people running around going, is this guy going to make it or not? And about 6 months before I could get back on my feet, spent a lot of time lying in the back looking at the ceiling, thinking about what I wanted to do next. And I decided that good fortune had shined on me through much of my life, and it was time to find a way to give back and make a difference. And wound up in discussions, came very close to going to Washington to run the TARP program, the bank bailout program.
Is that the same position that Phil Angelides ended up with? Or
No, this
similar?
would have been in the Obama administration.
Okay.
Was pursued to do something with the Federal Reserve System, but decided that the real place to make a difference was in our own city. Because after all, think about it today, even if sanity prevailed in Washington, and I wouldn't hold your breath waiting for that, but let's imagine that there was some grand budget compromise. And we woke up tomorrow with a balanced federal budget. We'd still wake up in Los Angeles with really poor public schools, infrastructure falling down around us, and almost 1 in 5 Angelenos without a good paying job. That's a 5-alarm fire right here, and I think we need people to focus on it and see what we can do to make a difference in Los Angeles.
So is Los Angeles right now heading in the right direction or wrong direction?
I think the wrong direction. I think we've got all the talent in the world here to head in a better direction. We're diverse. I think any great city in the 21st century is going to be blessed with diversity like we are. We have to make it work for us.
How about particular neighborhoods or particular pockets of the city? Like, for instance, the Palisades. I'm assuming that people there are better off than the rest of the city, and that's heading in the right direction.
No, but I don't think if you look at almost any neighborhood in the city, it's worse off than it was. We're nearing SIGU, the 20th anniversary of the riots.
Right.
Let's look at the South Los Angeles community. Unemployment's as bad, if not worse. Fewer kids are graduating schools, and the infrastructure is in a worse place. So
What's causing that?
I think, frankly, it's an issue of leadership. I think the communities have been pandered to and promised to say, we care about you. Really? Well, how are people making a difference? What have we done? Go back to that USC Bioscience Center. That would have made a heck of a difference in the South Los Angeles community. The jobs to build it, the jobs to work there, the businesses in the neighborhood that would have spun off and been created. Instead, our elected officials sat it out and nothing happened.
Well, let's talk a little bit about public safety, though. The city is safer, and in terms of all the statistics that we hear from the police in terms of crime, violent crime, petty crime, not only citywide, but every single neighborhood. All indications are that the city is safer today than it's been in the last 20, 30 years.
The city as a whole is safer. Aggregate statistics, but the country as a whole is safer. Los Angeles is not different than New York, Chicago. All of the major cities have had seen a decline in Part 1 crimes. But if you look a little more carefully, I think the inability of our city to use its resources wisely are putting that in jeopardy. LA Times had an article very recently that law enforcement in Los Angeles are being paid overtime with IOUs.
So what does that mean? How do you
An
get paid?
IOU means, so you work a $100 day, instead of giving you $100 in cash, you're getting $75 in cash and a $25 IOU to be paid at some later date. You know when the later date is? 6 months after the mayor's race. Now, a couple of problems in that. Number one, it means you're not paying people for the work they're doing today, and those folks who live on that wage and folks in law enforcement need to support their families. More importantly, down the road, you got to pay that back. Where's that money going to come from? So we're safer today, but we're setting up a real trap for ourselves down the road. You see the physical blight, you see the potholes, the infrastructure not being maintained. But if we're not actually finding the resources, which we have to do, to pay for the work those detectives and the feet on the street are doing, we're going to have a real problem down the road.
You moved to Los Angeles when, in 2007?
2000.
2000. Why LA?
I grew up, was born in New York, a child of the 60s, not the Berkeley 60s, sort of the immigrant 60s. My dad moved for different jobs, settled in Michigan, moved back to New York for work. And as I had my wife and I had our first child, we decided that we wanted to settle somewhere other than New York. And as part of my business, we could go anywhere. We chose Los Angeles. And originally we thought, well, a year or two, we'll see what it's like. We love it here. And we now have 4 kids, and we're pretty deeply rooted in the community.
So now 2000, that means you've been here for a while.
Yep.
We in Los Angeles, we take anybody after 2 or 3 years, they're a native Angelino.
Yep.
So when you take a look at the totality of what Los Angeles is, and we talked about this is going to be the 20th anniversary of the riots.
Yep.
You weren't here during that time, but you certainly remember them happening. When you saw what was happening from across the country, what were you thinking about? What's going on in Los Angeles? What's going on in urban America?
Well, take a step back and say riots happen because of some underlying issues. Okay, there's a trigger point of some sort.
We know the trigger point.
And there was a trigger
Right.
point. But you go, any sociologist, demographer, people who study that will tell you it's because people can't find work. It's because they're frustrated. It's because their kids aren't being put on a path where they're getting educated and have a chance in life. That frustration, I think, still exists today to a very great extent. In those communities, the most impacted communities, we've not made progress. We haven't delivered resources. We haven't helped create jobs in those communities. Look at the example of Goodyear. Goodyear Tire left South Los Angeles before the riots. That's a long time ago.
So are you saying that the underlying conditions that caused the riots haven't changed much, and that we can have another riot?
Sure. I'm not Chicken Little. I hope we don't have that. I hope that we have better communication and better trust in some of those communities, so we don't ever reach that tipping point. But if it's a frustration, and you see it in other parts of the world, you see people massing in the Mideast and the Arab Spring because they can't find work, they can't support their families, they're frustrated that government's not doing the job. We see it in an Occupy movement. So I think we're living in tough times, and I think government has to find a way to raise its game and make it better.
Well, you mentioned Occupy LA. What do you think about Occupy LA? Do you sympathize with some of the notions of Occupy LA?
I sympathize with the frustration. Again, I grew up in a different era. I did my time, I did my work, I worked hard, and I found opportunity. Today, someone can do their work hard, and they may not find opportunity. So I share the frustration. I don't think it was particularly well handled. It wound up costing the city many millions of dollars. That's many millions of dollars that we're not spending in law enforcement or in our schools. So implicitly, those in government made a choice. I might have made a different choice, which would be to enforce the laws. There are laws which say you cannot congregate in public parks after 10 o'clock. Doesn't mean you can't protest. The right to protest, I absolutely support. But we turned one set of people who are frustrated and spent $5 million of public resource supporting that protest. Now, there are lots of other people in Los Angeles who are frustrated. We can't write checks to all of them. I think we have to keep that resource and spend it where it's going to make a difference.
But when you talk about Occupy LA, and you briefly mentioned that you had seriously considered taking an appointment in the Obama administration to administer TARP, et cetera. We recently had this settlement with the banks where they're going to put in $18 billion, and exactly how that's going to happen, I'm not clear. But you've been critical of that particular settlement, and you think that it should be handled differently and that the money should be used differently. You want to speak to that?
If you look at the underwater component, meaning how much has been lost by Angelinos, just folks in their home. It's north of $1 trillion. The California portion is north of $750 billion.
But a lot of that was paper money. It wasn't like...
No, it's real money. You had it. You had it. You may have lost your home. You may be underwater. The number of still underwater mortgages in California is more than a third. So it's a real loss. Okay, many people, it's their life savings in their home. Now, the only way that's going to come back, in my view, is if people can find a path to better paying work. Because housing, whether you are redoing the home or the apartment you live in or trading up, you have a bigger family, a bigger home, you can only pay for it if you have a job, a good paying job. So my criticism of the settlement is it didn't do anything to address the underlying cause, in my view.
Explain to the students how you view the settlement or what the facts are of the settlement so they can have a better understanding.
The settlement in simple terms, and it's hundreds of pages, so if you can't read tonight, give it a look. You get to sleep. But in simple terms, the banks have agreed to compensate people who were foreclosed on improperly to an average of about $2,000 a family, homeowner. You're out of your home, your life has been ruined. Is $2,000 going to compensate you for that? I don't think so. There's a certain series of concessions the banks have agreed to do in addition, which is for those who are still in their homes to write down a portion of their mortgage. Now, by the way, the homeowner may be third in line. Many homes today have a second mortgage. So if the banks write down the first mortgage, the first constituency to benefit are the second mortgage, which might be those same banks. So what looks to be a concession on their part, they take out of the left pocket and put it in the right pocket. Now, the piece I think that was missed was an opportunity to go to those same banks who clearly are admitting some form of wrongdoing. If they're putting up $25 billion, there must be some things they didn't do quite well, quite properly. Why didn't we take some portion of that and create a job fund? Not a public works program, not something governments administer. Let's get some private sector people and let's use that to provide loans to small businesses in our community. Because it's
so you would take some of that 18 billion, well, California is not going to get California's going to get like 6 billion of that.
So take $1 billion of our portion. We could do one in Los Angeles, we could do one in Fresno, we could do a series of them through the state. But
so that would mean that the individual homeowners that were going to get, let's say, 2,000 would end up getting 1,700 instead.
Or maybe you could ask for a little bit more money. So whether you got 26 instead of 25, but let's assume we could find our way to $1 billion. Why don't we provide that to capital? Because I hear consistently, being out in the community, that small business owners can't find the capital to expand, can't find the money to hire another person, to fix up their storefront, to build another line in their factory. And if we could help provide those jobs, the best prospect for those homeowners who have been really harmed by the turbulence in the markets and the turbulence in home finance and the economy is to find a better paying job.
Are you a Democrat or a Republican?
I'm a declined to state. I'm an independent.
Which is the largest growing category of registrants in not only California, but in Los Angeles as well.
You know, I see in both parties some things I admire and people I admire, and I see in both parties things that I can't come to grips with. So I pick the person. I pick somebody who I think is going to lead in the right way, and I vote with my conscience.
Now, you're an investment banker, or have been most of your life. And when people take a look at all the issues that are happening, especially Wall Street and the meltdown and all that, they blame investment bankers.
Right.
So obviously when an investment banker is going to run for public office, you're not going to put on the title there that you're running, you're going to put down investment banker. What's going to be your ballot designation? Yeah,
well, I've been a civically engaged person all my life. I'm the only one running who signed the front of a paycheck. I started my own business that employs people around the world. I've driven a delivery truck. I worked in a printing plant cleaning ink off the floors. I washed dishes in a restaurant. So I think my path, I'm absolutely proud to have out there and say, I've lived in the real world, worked my way up, had some success. And the business I was in was part of a global service business. Right. We dealt with sophisticated businesses, individuals around the world. And I think
but you understand the rough and tumble of politics and campaigns, and that people are going to say, hey, this is an investment banker.
Yeah, and my response to that is real simple, which is I'm the only one in the race who signed the front of a paycheck. The others, if we're going to label people, are career politicians. And if people are satisfied the last 10 years with where we are, those career people created it. And if we're satisfied with that, we should stick with one of them, because I'll never be one of them. And if they want to look for somebody who's going to change some things, I'm going to change some things.
The other issue that would come up, of course, is that you worked for the current administration. Antonio Villaraigosa, you were his first deputy for economic development.
Right.
That meant that, because there are many deputy mayors, but you were number one in line, many reported to you. You were in charge of 13 departments, including all the proprietary departments, et cetera.
Yep.
I mean, that's significant. Now, you were only there for 15 months, and many at City Hall give you a lot of credit for some changes, not the guys that are going to be running and gals that are going to be running against you for sure, but there's clearly a lot of good that came from your experience. But you're going to be tied, of all the candidates running, you're going to be tied to the incumbent more so than the others.
Well, put it in some context. First of all, I admire Antonio, we're friends. I respect the effort and the work he's done. And in the areas we worked together, as you said, we did get a lot done. DWP, we cut $250 million from costs in just 30 days to stave off a rate increase. We cut in half the time it takes to permit a restaurant. We go through lots of things we did in a relatively short period of time. But his name's not going to be on the ballot. The incumbency is what I'm running against, because those others, they also passed the policies. They're the ones who oversaw the city as a whole for the last decade or more. And I think it's that period of time we should be talking about, not my 12 months with the city.
But during the 15 months that you were with the city,
Right.
you learned about the city. You learned about how it works. You learned
Yep.
about the personalities. What do you take away from that experience? If someone was going to go into city government, what would be the three things you would tell them about working within the city of Los Angeles?
It's a good question and the right one. I spent long enough, I think, to know how we can do things differently. I went down there with a few misimpressions myself. I spent most of my years in the private sector. In the private sector, one rule above others matters, which is you better leave your client satisfied at the end of the day, or they go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. They have a choice. Your students, if they don't like the class, they're not learning something, the next semester is going to be a lot less
That's
full.
impossible, but go ahead with the hypothesis.
So think about that in the private sector, think about it in any service industry. You go to City Hall, I couldn't find the leadership who went there every day and say, okay, my job is to make a constituent happy. I found people more interested in their own life ambition, their own public image, than actually fixing a problem. First issue I found. Second, I was told before I went, everything's intractable. You read in the newspaper, it's just so hard.
Let's go back to the first one.
Yep.
Ambition and politics is clearly intertwined. But I would argue that ambition in the private sector is even greater, and in part what makes people successful within the private sector.
But the difference in the private sector is there's measurement and accountability. You could be the most ambitious person in the world in the private sector. If you don't deliver, you're not going to get anywhere. In the public sector, what I found, absolutely ambition, that's great. Okay, but what results? What's actually transpired? What's gotten done? I found people who are not there, maybe it's old-fashioned, I think of public service in any form as a life choice, not a lifestyle. I found lots of people who are interested in the lifestyle, lots of people very concerned with the next office, the public image, but not the same foundational concern to say, okay, have I made a difference? Have I really changed something? Have I improved the lot of those who live in South Los Angeles? Where's the scorecard? Okay, over 20 years, what has happened? And I think everyone who lives in those communities have a right to say, you know what, pox on all of you, the incumbency, because you haven't done it. You had your chance.
Yeah, but unlike the private sector, in the public sector, we have the right to vote them out of office when they come up for election. And even here in Los Angeles and California, we have the right to recall someone if we really think that they are doing something egregious.
Right.
And obviously that doesn't occur in the private sector. But so what is it about democracy where if in fact people are not doing their job, elected officials or bureaucrats or what have you, that we, the voters, the residents, don't do anything about it, even though it exists, the channels for us to make a difference exist, yet we don't do it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it is the question in Los Angeles today. How do people engage? Are they engaged enough? Are they informed enough as part of their engagement? The issue I mentioned before about the overtime in law enforcement. The LA Times had a cover story on it, front page above the fold. They called me to comment. I said I didn't think it was the right way to do things. I actually said it was fraud. If it happened in the private sector where you're paying your employees with IOUs, you go to jail for it. It's serious stuff. They called every elected official. No comment. Now, why would we be satisfied with no comment? There may be a perfectly valid explanation, then put it out there. Or you may need to say, we don't have the money now, but we're going to try to find it. But no comment? And I find it somewhat frustrating, to be honest with you, that Angelino settled for that.
So let's go back.
Yeah.
3 things you would tell a student or somebody who's about to enter City Hall.
First,
beware of ambition.
Yeah, beware of ambition and seek to change the culture so that you're serving the needs of a constituent. The second one, the problems that are presented as intractable aren't. A little bit of common sense will go a heck of a long way.
And that means that every time you see a problem and you say, hey, let's try this, people will tell you, no, that's already been tried, or you can't do that, or there's this regulation, or...
You can't, too hard, you can't. And I liken it a simple metaphor. I'm the breakfast cook in my house, right? You ever made an omelet without breaking an eggshell? No. Now, if it's a 3-egg omelet and you're breaking 3 or 4 eggs, that's probably okay. You're breaking a dozen eggs, you're not too good at what you do. I found a lot of people not willing down there in City Hall to break the eggshell. Well, you're never going to get an omelet because they're running for another office. They're concerned that in breaking that eggshell, someone's going to be unhappy. 90% happy, 10% unhappy, you'd say that's pretty good satisfaction. In politics, that doesn't work for those people because they want to run for another office, and you can't have those 10% of the people unhappy with you. So the problems are not as intractable as they're presented. They can be done, and there are examples around the country of other cities who do it better or do it differently, and it makes a difference.
Number 3?
Number 3, don't lose your grounding in common sense. It's not a parallel universe. I get business is not public service and the cities aren't business, but the same principles of measurement and accountability that work everywhere else in your life are going to go a long way. So the first time someone tells you it doesn't work that way here, or you're not, I know it worked for you in your prior life, but it's not going to work here. That probably means it really will work. They just don't like the result, or they haven't tried it themselves.
So this is the first time you're running for public office.
Yep.
Have you ever intimately been involved in another campaign for somebody else where you were like on a finance committee or something of that nature?
5th grade class president.
Did you win?
5 boys, 4 girls. I had it stacked in the election, so it turned out all right. No, I've been engaged in others' campaigns, but not intimately engaged in their campaigns.
So what surprises you the most about running a campaign, about running for public office?
Let's see. I have probably a newfound respect for an off-Broadway bit part player, in the sense that every day you show up and it's the first time people have ever heard you. So you better perform. I could skip hearing myself speak. I don't consider myself a great performer in that context, but I think it's important stuff to talk about. So I like meeting people. I enjoy questions from you, your students and colleagues. I enjoy that part of it very much. I don't know how to measure the difference between busy and productive. In my prior life, there was busy and productive, and you knew the two weren't always the same. This campaigning stuff seems like certainly a lot of busy. How productive it all is, I don't know. It's hard to measure, especially since it's so early. And other than your engaged students, I don't know how many people in Los Angeles right now are actually following this and understand there's an election.
So it's kind of like even though the campaign has started, it's kind of pre-campaign. Obviously, the presidential campaign is going to take up and soak up all the information and all the press, but there'll be stories about this. But usually, people are talking about you setting the groundwork for the campaign, and that's about raising money, about getting endorsements, putting the team together, putting the strategy together. We know that former Mayor Richard Riordan has endorsed you. Mm-hmm. Who else has endorsed you at this particular moment?
He's the only endorsement I sought. I think Angelinos see through most of the political endorsements. And I'm looking for people in the real world to endorse my candidacy and get behind that, so that's what we're working on. Like every other candidate, we're raising money. It's necessary to run a campaign.
Okay, so how does a rich guy like you go to somebody and say, hey, give me money, I want to run for public office? I mean, I think that's even harder than a typical elected official who most people know they're not well off. It's sort of like, if you really want to do this, you got millions, why don't you just finance it yourself?
It's kind of simple. I'm not buying a trophy for myself. Mm-hmm. The most valuable thing I have in life is my time.
Convinced me to give you $1,000.
I'm going to make a difference. You know who I am. If you don't think I can make a difference, if you don't think my time is worth that, that's fine. Find somebody else to back.
All right.
But so far we've been
successful. You know what? I left my checkbook upstairs. I'll have to get back to you.
But different than the others, I find, frankly.
No, but it is tougher for you, isn't it? Do you think it's tougher for you, the degree of difficulty?
No, the toughness is not the fact whether I've been successful in my life or not. That's not it. The tougher thing is I don't have a list of people I've bestowed favors on in City Hall, so I can't call you up and say, remember that permit, or you want that permit, okay, or that city contract, wink, wink, that you're getting. So I don't have the City Hall office clout. I haven't done this 15 times, so we have a built-in list. The city actually issued a new measure. It was put on the ballot to great fanfare that we're going to reform campaign finance, and all those contractors who do business with the city vote for this proposition, and we're going to reform things. Okay, there's an article recently. The same people who put it on the ballot are raising money from people who do business with the city.
So the ballot, what was proposition?
I think it was H.
H, yeah.
H. So their interpretation was, well, you don't have a pending contract with the city. But there are examples where there are service providers or businesses who do business with the city where all of their business is with the city. So they signed big contracts last year and big contracts next year.
But since
right now they're not in a bid, I can raise money from you.
So the the interpretation of the law right now is that if you are actively going after business, have responding to an RFP or something of that nature, you cannot contribute.
Yeah, but that's 2% of the 100 who do business. And you go, okay, I was born at night, but not last night. And so the corruption, and I don't mean the literal corruption of money under the table, but you say, okay, you don't think that those contractors are donating those campaigns because they expect something in return or got something before?
Right.
No, of course they expect something.
But right now that during this period of the campaign, they measure candidates by, number one, what their name recognition is. Number two, by their endorsements. Number three, how much they've raised. I mean, that's typically what happens.
Yeah, but you take a step back and say, okay, name ID now. There's no giant in the race, myself included.
Yeah, and most people can't even spell your name.
Can't spell my name, can't spell the other names either, by the way. So you do a poll and you say, so what? It's a year away. If the election were tomorrow, that's a problem. But it's not tomorrow.
Correct.
Okay, that's the easiest thing to manufacture is name ID. Most races are a referendum on the current office holder in the times. Okay, and I think the general perception Angelenos have is they get promised a lot, but nothing changes, nothing happens. And I happen to think we're in difficult times with the unemployment we have, the infrastructure falling around us, schools that aren't working. So maybe Angelenos want to think about change. Most outside candidacies, you don't start as a front runner. Of course not. But go back to the football. 2 months before the playoffs start, right? The Packers and the Steelers were going to win because that was conventional thinking. Those were the names at the tops of everyone's minds. Didn't turn out that way. I have a friend who's helped me who was very involved in Bill Clinton's first presidential campaign. And he says a year out, Clinton was at 2% in the polls. Austin, you're at 3%, so you're in good shape, right?
Yeah.
It's too early to measure anything.
Same example for Obama last time. Yeah.
So I think the issues that Angelenos care about have yet to be defined. It's obvious, of course, you'd expect those who've spent their lifetimes in office with some name ID to be considered the front runners because they spent 20 years investing in that. But let's have a campaign. Let's actually have a series of debates and discussions about how do we get to where we are, and to the extent people wish to or not, hold accountable those who are in office, and are they really going to be able to make change and do things differently?
How much do you think you're going to have to spend to remember that there's a primary election in March, about a year from today, and then the top 2 vote getters go into a runoff in May?
I don't know. People tell me it's not cheap. I have had
how much are people telling you you're
the numbers are all over the place, but I think we'll have sufficient resources. I've been very fortunate, saved some money, and between the money I've saved and the money others
So you are willing to put some of your own money into your campaign?
Sure. I believe in what I'm doing, and I think I could give it to charity as I've done for a long, long time, or I can invest it in the city I care about.
What's the general strategy for your campaign in terms of how you're going to approach the race? What are going to be some of your issues, number one, and then what particular neighborhoods or particular groups are you going to go after? Or what's the strategy for you to win?
The strategy for me to win is to hope Angelenos want to engage, and I engage them throughout. I've been in just about every neighborhood in Los Angeles, and I'll continue to be. I'm not going to...
So you're running full-time right now. You don't have another job.
That's what I do. So I start the day doing things like this, and I finish the day doing things like this. And anywhere Angelinos want
But
to
you are
engage,
taking your wife out tonight, Valentine's Day, right?
well, I snuck.
I'll take that as a no, man.
I'm taking her out in between. Let's see, I was at my daughter's volleyball game. I'm here. I'll take my wife to a quick dinner, then I'm going to take my son to Boy Scouts. So I got a full evening and a full day. I believe ultimately this campaign is going to be about change and jobs in particular. I put 18,000 miles in my car in my 15 months with the city because I felt visiting private sector employers directly, not making them come down to City Hall, not asking them to hire a lobbyist to come see me, but knock on their door, see what we could do to help them. My windshield survey, unemployment's close to 20%. It's not the 13 or 14 you read in the newspaper, because that excludes people who gave up hope and quit looking for work. It excludes people who are part-time, wish they're full-time. It excludes people who make $9 an hour when they used to make 19 in
So the whole
benefits.
concept of discouraged workers, underemployed, et cetera.
So let's assume that directionally 1 in 5 Angelinos aren't in a good paying job. Okay, I grew up in Michigan. The small town I grew up in, we'd visit Detroit, the big city, when I was growing up. In the 60s, Detroit was a pretty happening place. Schools worked, public services worked. People could find good paying work. Now let's roll the clock forward less than a generation, more than half the people have left Detroit. Not because of typhoid. It's actually kind of simple. The jobs left, the tax base went with it, the community disintegrated around them. People all went elsewhere in search of opportunity. And with 1 in 5, with a third of our families below the poverty line, it's jobs. It's what are we going to do for Los Angeles to lead again? You know, for those who have time this weekend, go down to the exhibit LACMA has on Los Angeles and California in the 40s and 50s. It's pretty inspiring, actually. Mm-hmm. The dreamers, the doers, the aerospace engineers, the artists, the educators. It's kind of a sharp contrast to today. We need to rebuild that same spirit. We need to find we can recreate our economy in good paying work for Angelinos, because that provides a tax base, that provides pride, the ability to support a family. And I think that's going to be the defining issue in the election.
You worked in the mayor's office for 15 months.
Yep.
You referenced Mayor Bloomberg from New York earlier. What does it take to be an effective mayor in Los Angeles? What reforms would you propose in terms of the mayor's office? And when you compare the mayor of LA to the mayor of New York, what's not the personalities, but the office? What's the biggest distinctions that come to your mind?
Well, it's apples, oranges, and bananas. I mean, first of all, the mayor of Los Angeles has direct control over a port, an airport, and utility. It's the only big city in the country that has that. Talk to Mayor Bloomberg about his airport. It's tied up with the governors of New York, New Jersey. They can't do anything there. Our own airport reports directly to the mayor. And I think one of the things that hasn't been tested or used to its full potential since charter reform is the mayor being responsible for appointing and overseeing the general managers of all the city departments and the proprietaries.
Yeah.
And I think there's enormous opportunity in that.
The charter reform and charter, really you're talking about the Constitution of the city of Los Angeles.
Yes, and that was changed a little more than a decade ago under former Mayor Reardon, and shifted the authority directly to the mayor to appoint the line managers. And so this mayor, or any mayor in Los Angeles, now appoints the head of the second biggest airport in the country, the largest port in the country, the largest municipal utility, the second largest police force.
You're saying that Mayor Villaraigosa has more power in that area than Mayor Bloomberg.
Correct.
Okay, but most of us always talk about how little power he has compared to Mayor Bloomberg. He has no control over education, no control over health care, little control over mass transit, et cetera. And so how would you strengthen those areas?
Well, I think it's a combination of use what you have, okay? And I think there's a lot of potential there. And then you have an enormous bully pulpit to lead. I got a problem solved for our utility. When I was there, an issue came down from Sacramento that would have cost Angelino ratepayers, so homeowners, businesses, a couple $2 billion. Would have been hundreds of millions per year. I got the problem solved by getting a coalition together after asking, by the way, everyone in the city and the county to help, and they all said no thank you. Wrote letters to the controller, the city council members, county supervisors, and they all said no thanks. So I got together a coalition of business and labor and the Moronga Indian tribe. The Moronga Indians are 100 miles from here. They're not LA City, they're not LA County, but they care about our economy. And they were part of our team who went to Sacramento and said, we got to change this, and we got to change. That's leadership. It's not the city charter, it's not pointing fingers at someone else. It's using the bully pulpit of leadership to get something done.
So you talked about general managers. The election's going to be in March, a little bit over a year from now. Whoever wins will become mayor on July 1st. On July 1st, all the general managers will still be there.
Yep.
That is as though Romney would have become president, and he would have to keep all the cabinet members that Obama has. Okay, speak to that.
Well, again, I think it's a tremendous opportunity. We have a wonderful diversity of strengths of people in the public and the private sector. Again, go back to Bloomberg. Bloomberg has compiled a team of private sector people, academics, public sector people to work alongside each other. So I look at that and say, okay, a good transition plan is going to look at each department, look at the leadership that's there and say, how do we make it better? There may be some of the departments, and there are some, where we have very good people running them. There are others where we need to make a leadership change. And let's just not look at the same chair shuffling suspects around Los Angeles. Let's broaden our horizon. Let's look in the rest of the country. Let's look around the world. When I brought in a new leader for DWP, our utility, okay, I hired someone with 30 years of utility experience. First time it had been done. The prior general managers were friends of mayors. There were people from City Hall going over to spike their pensions. There were people having a midlife career crisis. Novel idea. I said, let's find someone with 30 years of utility experience to run a utility. I think we need to take that same approach to each service that the city provides.
So would you keep Charlie Beck, police chief?
I think Charlie's doing a good job. I think he is a man of the community. It's a long way away. So I think at that time he and I would have to sit down, and I'd be well advised, I hope, on what makes sense to do.
So after the riots, one of the greatest reforms has always been police reform in terms of what happened. And, there was an improvement in police recruitment. There's more discipline of police officers. There's a greater emphasis of community policing. And then we have the police commission that oversees the police department. Do you believe there should be greater civilian review than what exists right now with the police commission?
I think there should be greater transparency, whether it's by civilians, by people, professionals who work for the city, or outside third parties. I think this city as a whole is stunning for its lack of transparency and accountability in comparison with almost any other major city in this country around the world.
Now, why is that?
It's leadership. Again, I think leadership either don't want to measure and hold accountable or haven't invested in the tools and the resources. When I started with the city, want to create jobs? First place in business, you talk to your vendors. Talk to people who sold you the coffee cups and say, hey, move a couple jobs to Los Angeles, right? I asked for a list of the top 100 vendors. Who are the 100 businesses who did the most business with the city? We didn't have it. I brought a big convention from Microsoft to town because I know the senior folks, Steve Ballmer, and convinced them to come, and it's great. In advance of it, I suggested we sit down with the Microsoft folks and see what we could do to help them anywhere in the city, and wanted to know how much business the city of Los Angeles did with Microsoft. The city didn't know. How can you begin to tell me you spend your money cost effectively and sensibly if you don't even know that?
So in a sense, you're saying that we should have a local preference, that all things being equal, we should buy from and invest in Los Angeles companies.
Yeah, we actually, one of the things I worked on in the city is we created for the first time ever a local preference to help small business in Los Angeles get more of what the city spends. But back to your broader point, whether it's the police commission oversight of the police department, I challenge anyone to go on the LAPD statistical review and just try to discern what exactly is going on. It's Greek. You need someone to interpret the data. It shouldn't be that hard. Look at our fire department. Our fire department, well-led, able people. Compare that to Phoenix. Phoenix, you log on, they say, here's our strategic plan. Here's what we're trying to do. Measure us by these. Here are the metrics we look at within the department. Can't find one for ours.
There are a variety of different initiatives at the state, county, and local level that are probably going to be on the ballot in November. Can I talk about a few of those and let me know if you're going to vote yes or no? Jerry Brown wants to put an initiative to tax the wealthy. Good idea or bad idea? Yes or no?
I think it only deals with...
On the ballot there, you got to just mark one thing, yes or no.
Yeah, but I get the privilege here of answering them more than yes or no. Do people have to pay more in tax? Sure. But...
So that's a yes?
But that's not going to solve the problem. And I told that directly when I met with the governor, because you can tax people incrementally more, but we have unemployment 5 points higher than the national average, California versus the rest of the nation. Taxing anybody more isn't going to solve that problem. So we need to build our tax base. We need to put people back to work, make it easier to employ people in California. That begins to spread the tax burden, and we have more people in the boat rowing, which I think is the path you have to go down.
Yeah, so I'm voting yes on that.
Yeah, I said yes.
Okay. In 2008, the voters of LA County passed a measure we know as Measure R, which is giving us the funds to do all kinds of transportation efforts. There may be an initiative on the ballot to extend the measure, not increase the tax, but just extend it a couple more years. Are you in favor of that?
I'm in favor on that, but can I tell you my companion measure I'd like to see go with it? Because I think we are...
Talk a little bit more about Measure R to contextualize it for the students.
Measure R is a half-cent increment in the county-wide sales tax. So every time you buy a cup of coffee, every time you go to the grocery store and buy something, you're paying sales tax, and that sales tax, there's now a 0.5% increment which goes to the county directly to fund infrastructure projects. Good idea. But to me, I think we're missing an equally good opportunity. One of the other things that was on the ballot at the same time was high-speed rail. Okay? High-speed rail, I actually think, is a solution in search of a problem which doesn't exist. At the time Californians voted on it, it was projected to cost $30 billion, of which the federal government was going to pay 10. Now it's projected to cost $100 billion, of which the federal government's only committed for 3. By the way, there is no high-speed rail authority in the world which is self-sufficient, so it'll be several billion each year to subsidize the losses. Look at the ridership forecast. They forecast 60 million of riders, north and south. You know how many people fly north and south every year in California? 3 million.
That's because the other ones are afraid to fly. They'll take high-speed rail.
That means 57 million people are going to come from Kansas to ride the train, I guess, right? So my proposition is actually pretty simple, which is I'd rather see the Angelino portion of that 100 billion, because the state doesn't have a printing press. We have to pay our taxes to pay that 100 billion back. So the Angelino share is, what, a third of that? Mm-hmm. I'd rather take that third, spend it here to fix our roads, our sidewalks, to accelerate the pace of investment in public infrastructure. And I happen to live in the Palisades. I live trapped west of the 405. I'm told by the elected officials that $1 billion for 10 feet of asphalt, one lane, is going to solve that. Show of hands. Anybody think $1 billion is going to fix the 405? One lane? All right, so I travel to every other major city. I travel to Washington. They're putting light rail down the middle of the highway, all the way from Dulles Airport, 40 miles into downtown DC. New York has done it from JF Kennedy Airport, 22 miles, all the way to Manhattan.
So
okay, why aren't we putting light rail down the middle of the 405 and actually solve the problem?
Kind of like what we have on the 105.
On the 105,
Yeah.
We should be doing it the 405, we should be doing it on the 101, we should be connecting our city. So I'd like to put on the ballot, get out of high-speed rail, take that money, invest in our local community.
But so back
Measure
to,
R, yes.
Back to the extension of Measure R, yes.
Sure.
And then you would also be willing to have even more sales tax or other type of tax that would lead to more mass transit in Los Angeles.
Well, what I'm saying is take money that we've already committed for, okay? Because Angelino's voted for the money to pay for high-speed rail. That's already, that's
But
some
they only
cost.
voted for a portion and it's statewide bond measures, correct?
Well, they voted for our share of that. They voted for 10 billion, so let's take our share. That's a pretty
Okay.
good start, okay?
Okay. Possibly on the ballot would be an initiative by LA Unified that would call for an additional $270 a year parcel tax from homeowners in order to boost funding for LAUSD.
I don't know that much about that one.
But would you be willing to, if this passes, the property tax for the average person that lives within LAUSD boundaries, which is mostly LA Unified, but it also includes 15 other cities, would increase by 270. If you were, would you be supportive of that in general?
I think we need more resources for schools, sure.
The governor and others at the state, including Senator Feinstein, are proposing an initiative that would raise $11 billion to overhaul the state's water system. And that may be on the ballot in November.
Again, like any informed voter, I'd like to read a little more about that one, but I think our water infrastructure, we live in a desert. And so we have to invest in our infrastructure. We are a generation behind in most of this, so it's probably necessary. Can we afford it this time? I don't think Californians are served very well because we're not presented with choice. I wish my elected officials had presented me with a choice of high-speed rail or light rail in the middle of 405. I'd vote for light rail in the middle of 405, and I think this water issue has to be put on the table and say, this is going to cost this much, transportation is going to cost this much, schools are this much. It's not an all-you-can-eat buffet, and I'd like to see those choices arrayed.
Right.
But yes, do I think we need to invest in our water infrastructure? Yes, we have to.
Circulating right now for signatures is another initiative that's using the acronym COPA, which stands for the California Opportunity and Prosperity Act. And I'm going to kind of read you very quickly. And most voters, this is all the information they get. They walk into a into the voting booth, and usually this is all they're going to get. The California Opportunity and Prosperity Act, which would decriminalize foreign workers without papers if they pay state taxes, know or are learning English, do not have felony convictions or are suspected terrorists, and are not a public charge, and have lived in California since before January 1, 2008. Would you support that?
Let me broaden it just slightly if I could. I am for immigration reform, comprehensive immigration reform. We have to embrace the diversity around us. My dad came as an immigrant. Our country has always been made better by embracing everybody from all walks of life who've come to our country. And I think every Californian, every American deserves on a path to become a citizen, for their kids to get an education and access to health care and everything else the community can provide. So if this is a step in that direction, absolutely. But frankly, I'd like to see us go further, because the only path forward for Angelenos is some sort of reform to make sure that every Angelino becomes a tax-paying, law-abiding citizen who can benefit themselves and the family from everything that government and the public has to offer.
Yeah. I mean, this is clearly an initiative that would try to legalize within the state and doesn't deal with federal policy, and it's a difficulty. And the theory, I think, is part of like that California passed marijuana laws that this federal state, the federal government still thinks it's unlawful, but within the state it is lawful. The theory is very similar to that.
Now, again, you can look at that issue, the same issue. You can be a voice of the hard edge side and say, listen, it costs $100,000 a year to incarcerate someone and $7,000 a year to educate them in the context of the DREAM Act. But I think the right way to look at this is we all are better off going forward together, period, end of story.
Yeah, according to this initiative, it would raise $325 million for the state, and I'm sure that's going to be part of it. So,
how would it raise the money?
In terms of they have to pay state taxes.
I see.
Okay.
That's good.
You mentioned the DREAM Act. Are you in favor of the DREAM Act? Yeah,
but again, I think it only deals with a piece of it. I think that access to education, health care, paying taxes, being part of, ultimately a citizen, I think is something we have to put everybody in this country in the path to. The border, I don't know, that's a federal thing. I don't know what the right answer is there. I think with the, frankly, decline in our economy and the rise in the economy of the South, I think we're not seeing a net influx of immigration. So let's use this as a point of equilibrium and go forward.
Clearly your job title, First Deputy for Economic Development. Clearly your platform about creating jobs and economic development. We've had, in the last couple of months, the demise of the redevelopment agencies, not only in Los Angeles, but throughout the whole state. Can you explain to the students and to the audience what a redevelopment agency was, why they're gone, and what the city or your administration would do to create a similar type of agency, or even if we need something like that?
I'll try to explain it in a way that our government never did in 25 years that they existed, so I'll make this simple. Redevelopment agencies were set up as a construct at a local level to help communities in need of being rebuilt, to be rebuilt by taking tax money, pulling it forward, borrowing against future tax money, and saying, okay, we're going to invest that. We're going to invest that in a hotel. We're going to invest it in a shopkeeper. We're going to invest it in housing for that community. What transpired over the next couple of decades is some very worthwhile projects and some fraud and abuse. But if you take a step back in Los Angeles, which was the biggest of the statewide and the biggest national redevelopment agency, 3/4 of the projects that our CRA, which is short for Community Redevelopment Agency, were involved in were in communities where more than 1/3 of the folks in that community live below the poverty line. Okay. Sounds like a community in need. Now, The way it was gone about was it became a handout for developers. It became a handout where people who could game the system somehow wound up with this money. And the choice the governor chose to make was, well, we can't afford to give money to those developers when we have schools without resources. Okay, I think that's a little bit of a false choice because the communities are still in need. Third below the poverty line. So there's not enough housing. There's not enough businesses and jobs in those communities or employers providing those jobs. So I'd like to see us, certainly in the city, we can take a step back. While I was there were more than 5, there were half a dozen or so different departments involved with the CRA. You say that's not a very efficient or sensible way to run things. Let's streamline it so we can be more effective and efficient. Government is the only entity that can use the power of eminent domain to actually assemble land and think about reimagining. And there are certain communities where the government's going to have to be that first investor or take the additional risk to make it happen. So we better use this opportunity to clean up our act, but we shouldn't be sitting here a year from now and saying we haven't replaced it with a better version because we need it desperately.
So are you okay with them being gone, or do you wish they were still there?
It's a little bit of the baby in the bathwater. I think what had happened because of the abuse, because of the lack of clarity of how to measure and hold accountable what was being done, a fresh start's okay by me, but let's have a comprehensive and thorough fresh start. Let's just not ignore it and allow time to march on.
What's that fresh start going to look like?
Well, I think Los Angeles ought to lead. We were the biggest. As I said, I think it ought to be a single agency within the city. They need clearly to know what the resources is they have. I think the choice, the way it was set up to make housing and job creation compete at the tip of the spear for money is not a good choice because you need both. So I think that was flawed. They'll need the power of eminent domain, and they'll need to understand how much resource consistently they'll have in the future to do it.
Recently, the City Council approved, and I think you are the chair of a Blue Ribbon Commission looking at this, the negotiations with the developer AEG, Anschulz Entertainment Group, which owns Staples Center, LA Live. The council approved relocating the convention center, which was under your purview as deputy mayor, to make room for an NFL stadium. Can you talk a little bit about that and also the environmental impact report, and then how the new portion of the convention center is going to be financed?
Sure. Let's take a step back to make sure people understand what was done. And I led the efforts on it, so I was deeply involved in it. In most simple terms, Phil Anschutz is going to put up $1 billion of his own money and build a football stadium. That's great.
His own money.
His own money. Not your money, not your money, nobody's money here. Now, they're going to tax those who go to events there just as you do at Staples Center or other venues in the city. So if it's a $40 ticket, it can cost you $42. In the increment, they're going to use to move and fix our convention center. Right now, our convention center consists of a West Hall and a South Hall. The South Hall is the big one, the West Hall is the small one. They're not contiguous. Trying to get a convention customer to go to the West Hall, it's kind of like getting your teenagers to go to the kids' table at Thanksgiving. They don't want to do it. Nobody wants to go there. Okay? So ideally, they would have been built in the first place next to each other. The city doesn't have the money on its own to do that. So Anschutz effectively is going to pay to fix that, a few $100 million to fix it, which is great. So we'll have a more competitive convention center. We'll have a football stadium. The 8 weekends a year is nice, but the big opportunity in Los Angeles out of all this is we'll have a covered event center. So think of events like an NCAA Final Four. 50,000 people come from out of town. They stay for a week. They spend a lot of money.
Well, when LMU is going to be there, we won't be coming in from out of town. We're going to be...
All right, so this year, but next year when you may not make it. So if you look at what's going to happen, that's out-of-town money. That's real money. That's incremental taxes, restaurants, hotels, all the tax to the city, plus the dollars and wages that creates jobs. It's going to create 20,000 jobs to build this new stadium and convention center. It's going to create 10,000 jobs to staff them along the way, and that's all good. The best part of it is no public money. I mean,
But you know that the narrative isn't that. I mean, when people talk about it, they think that the city's going to spend money.
I know, but they should do the homework. It's real simple. I met with AEG, I met with the NFL, and I made it very clear. I said, we're broke. Okay, if you're looking to us for money, you're looking for us to do anything, we don't have it. This will be the first time.
Very few cities do.
But the good fortune in Los Angeles is we're one of the few places the NFL can go to where it can privately finance a stadium. And the NFL, if you understand their business model, it's built on successful local markets. Different than in the past where there was Enron money in Houston, where you had municipalities bidding to build stadiums. You don't have that anymore. So they have a troubled franchise in San Diego, one in Jacksonville, one in St. Louis. They've got to put them somewhere. Los Angeles being one of the few places that can privately finance, as Mr. Anschutz is doing, a stadium because farmers will pay $700 million to put their name on it. Businesses throughout Los Angeles will buy the suites, people will buy the tickets. So it's that private capital that's going to build it, not a dollar of public money, not a penny of public money. I think it's a good project. Now, it has to be done right. No public money.
There will be public bonds that will then be paid by the ticket tax.
Which Anschutz has agreed, if there's not enough ticket tax, he'll cover the difference. So effectively,
which is what was done at Staples Center.
Correct. And so there's been no public money in Staples Center, and there will be no public money in the downtown stadium. The jobs have to be real jobs. We want to make sure that the jobs go to Angelino, so we don't see a bunch of Texas license plates building the thing. Let's make sure that there are real jobs, and we do compete more effectively in their convention center, and I'd like to come back and talk about that part. And we said the environmental stuff has to be done. We have to do it right. This has the potential to be the stadium with the most accessibility by public transportation of any stadium in the country, only if we follow through. Mm-hmm. Only if we actually have a concrete plan, only if our MTA is part and at the table doing what they have to do to make it so.
So obviously, if you're mayor of LA, July 2013, you would be very supportive of this whole project.
I've been supportive 2 years ago, I'm supportive today, I continue to be supportive.
Speak to the environmental impact review and how that process has changed for the stadium.
For the stadium, what was done was...
Explain to the students what environmental impact reviews are.
So there's something called CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act, which provides for the state.
CEQA, CEQA.
CEQA. Provides for the state and local government to review any project of any consequence to make sure the impacts on the environment are understood and either agreed to or not agreed to, or ways are taken to mitigate or lessen them. Now, the principal impact of a stadium like this is going to be traffic. As far as I know, there are no snails living, under the convention center, or exotic species or butterflies as near the airport or other things. So it's going to be traffic. Now, to anyone to say there will be no impact, that's a little bit of pie in the sky, right? It's a stadium which will seat 50 or 60,000 people. Many events happening on a Sunday, plenty of traffic, traffic issues. That first Monday night game, I don't know if I'd necessarily want to be downtown. So the mitigation part of it has to be an equally important part, because you can measure for an event how many incremental cars you think there'll be. By the time the stadium is built, there'll be 10,000 hotel rooms, so many Angelinos or out-of-towners will actually come stay down there. There'll be public transportation to service a certain proportion, and then you're left with what level of incremental auto traffic is on the road at what point in the day. And I think it can be mitigated, but only if we make sure public transportation is an important piece of the pie.
So we are at Loyola Marymount University having a conversation with Austin Beutner, candidate for mayor of Los Angeles. I'm going to ask students to line up over here if they want to ask questions and get a good grade. So they will be doing that. Talking about grades, using the traditional academic scale of A, B, C, D, F, A being excellent, F being failure, how would you grade Mayor Villaraigosa?
Incomplete.
Okay. What assignment does he have to turn in to get his final grade?
I think he's talked about the changes he wants to see happen in education and infrastructure and job creation. I think he needs to continue to make progress in those. I hope he does.
What grade would you give President Obama?
Probably a similar incomplete. I think that he has inherited the presidency at probably one of the more difficult times, certainly in my adult life. Put forth a series of policies to hopefully remedy some of those, but the jury's still out. Our economy's still in a bad way, and that has to change.
Obama or Romney, who are you going to vote for?
Like most Californians, I vote in private. I supported President.
You're a public figure.
Yeah, but public figures don't have to tell you who you vote for.
Yeah, but they're always endorsing people here and there.
I don't think Obama's
Mayor Reardon's already told us who he's going to vote for mayor.
I supported President Obama last time. I believe we needed to go in a different direction. I still continue to believe that. I don't know who the alternative will be or whether there'll be more than one alternative. And so at the moment, I'm still an Obama supporter, but I'd like to see who else is in the race, and then I'll have a choice to make.
What grade would you give Governor Jerry Brown?
Equally and incomplete in the sense he's 18 months in. What's happened so far? He's talked about the need to bring fiscal responsibility to the state. I absolutely laud that. I met with him just a couple of months ago, and I met with him before he was elected. And both times I said, if you want a statue in front of the Capitol building in Sacramento, it won't be because you balance the state's budget. It'll be because Californians can find work. And so I think he's done good work to try to bring financial stability to the state. I give him less than good marks so far on what he's done to make the environment in California where people can actually put people to work.
Police Chief Beck.
I give him high marks. I think he's done a good job. I think he has continued the path Bratton set us on to make that department more measurable and accountable, but he's a man of the community. I think that's really important.
Sheriff Lee Baca.
Same. I think he's doing a good job.
Superintendent John Daisy of LAUSD.
Jury's out. It's early. I like his ideas. I think he brings a fresh perspective. He wants to see change happen. So I'm a big fan. But again, it's very early to actually give him a grade.
The LA City Council.
I give them much lower marks. You take a step back and say, what actually gets done? So it's hard to grade a student. I guess the academic equivalent is they never turn in their homework, they don't want to take the test, but they'd like you to pass them on to the next grade. So is that an incomplete or is that an F? I don't know which one, but I don't think city council actually gets much done.
Okay. You wouldn't make it as a professor at LMU. Too many incompletes. That's not looked upon as being really good. So we're going to take some questions from some students.
Look forward to it.
Hi, I'm Jared Etronich. What I gathered here today was one of your strongest points is coming from the private sector, that you want to create a lot of jobs, or more jobs in LA, to stimulate the economy. And a year and a couple months from now, if you are mayor, which departments or sectors specifically would you stress? Like you said earlier, there's a lack of leadership and a lack of accountability. What specific sector do you think needs the most work?
I gave a speech on jobs a couple of weeks ago. It's online. I encourage you, again, if you can't sleep tonight, to give it a look. And I identified 4 or 5 sectors where I thought we had a comparative advantage, because we can't compete everywhere for everything. But I'll give you one very simple and actionable one. While at the city, as Professor Guerra mentioned, I oversaw the marketing convention apparatus. And I was stunned to find out that the cities of Santa Monica, Beverly Hills, and Los Angeles don't collaborate. I actually found that out visiting Shanghai. I knocked on the door. I visited the Shanghai tourist office, and the woman said, "That's interesting. Yesterday, the folks from Beverly Hills were here." So the cities don't collaborate. I got together the Reagan Library, the African American Museum, and the Getty, who had never been in the same room. They don't collaborate. Found out that none of those cultural institutions or cities collaborate with the 2 biggest employers, or the 2 biggest draws in our region, which are Disney and Universal Studios. So we should be working together. We can bring more tourists. Now let's take a different approach. LA has something called LA Inc., this sort of city bureaucracy to market Los Angeles. 4 years ago in New York, Bloomberg looked at the same challenge and said, let's blow it up. Let's set this up with a top Madison Avenue executive. Let's bring in some tremendous private sector marketing talent. In those 4 years since, New York has added 6 million tourists, Los Angeles less than 1. All right, so number 1, tourists, easy one to take on. Let's do something similar here. We have tremendous marketing people from our studios and the creative industry. Let's set up our own LA and company, get some top people to lead it, get it outside of City Hall. Let's start convening, because it's free for cities. It's pretty easy for a mayor or anyone to get together, Disney plus the cultural institutions plus the cities, and say, you know what, we're all going to be on the same page. Let's market Los Angeles as a whole. Let's bring in a few million more tourists, and that'll create jobs.
But back to Jared's question, is there any particular department that you would try to disband or merge into another one?
In the city? Dozens. In permitting, for instance, one of the issues I looked at in permitting, there are actually 17 different departments involved in permitting opening a restaurant in the city of Los Angeles. Really? 17? I don't think we need 17. And there are chapter and verse examples. There is a...
So you wouldn't necessarily get rid of a department, but you would put a process like that into one specific department?
Yeah, effectively combine them. There are half a dozen departments involved with what the CRA does. So we have the overlapping responsibilities. You look at how a street light has changed in Los Angeles. You have DWP worries about the hotline, the electric lead, and the Bureau of Streetlights comes and changes the bulb. So I think there's duplication. Whether actually technically the department goes away or not, I don't know. But we've got to get rid of the silos, get the departments working for one customer, which is you or someone in the community.
Hi, I'm Connor. I have an article that CBS published last week, and it's discussing a yacht that the city of LA owns. And Mayor Villaraigosa says that it's not a yacht, it's a boat, yet it's 73 feet long, and it's worth $1 million. So I consider that a yacht. My question is that they're going to do some renovations that are going to cost $750,000 of $1 million, and also every year it costs roughly $300,000 in services, captain fees, fuel. And the Port of LA owns it to try to bring in business, to try to take business people around the port. But when they looked at the last 4,000 people who have used it over the last 2 years, it was men from the Jonathan Club, people from the Morongo Casino. And I was wondering, as mayor, do you think that the city should sell it, or do you think they should continue spending taxpayer dollars on that boat when it could be used for better things such as schools? Or
They should sell it. It serves no valid commercial purpose. Sell it.
So, have you been on that yacht?
Yeah, when I went to oversee the port, so they took me out. I didn't make the full tour because I had about 20 minutes. It's not a yacht.
It looks like a tugboat.
But I think the more important point is in tough times, okay, people can't find work. We got to make every nickel go further. And how can you look an Angelino in the eye and say we can afford to spend $1 million on a boat? But don't need to.
But we know that money is not coming from the general fund. We know, for instance, that the harbor makes its own money. It cannot transfer that money to the city of LA. If we get rid of that yacht, that $1 million is not going to go to a street, schools, anything.
No,
it basically goes back.
What
it
that $1
basically
million
goes back to the Chinese shippers who pay all that.
No. The $1 million is going to go to build infrastructure in that port and create more jobs in the port.
One of the major problems I see with the city of LA is that the harbor, the airport, which you mentioned are economic engines, by federal and state law, cannot give money to the city.
Yeah,
So they charge, for instance, the landing fees at LAX are lower than most other cities. We can charge them a lot more, but there's no reason to charge them because the money, they couldn't do anything with the money.
Well,
that
$1
million will make a difference.
Okay, LAX we need to modernize.
Absolutely.
Okay, and the money to modernize is going to come by investing in the airport.
Yeah.
Same thing with our port.
I think we need to keep the yacht.
All right, well, you pay for the $1 million, I can keep the yacht. But I'd rather see the $1 million.
I don't have to pay. I'm telling you, it's the Chinese shippers who are paying for it.
Yeah, but then the Chinese shippers, if they're paying for it, okay, that money means that when Angelinos go to the store and buy something imported from China, it costs more. Or it means they're making a choice to go to Houston.
Well, that's exactly it.
Okay, it makes us less competitive.
Oh, okay. I've been on that yacht.
My name is Paul, and wanted to thank you for being here tonight. And you mentioned earlier that you were in favor of bringing a football team to Los Angeles. And we all know that traffic is definitely going to be affected, as well as public transportation. And how can you really ensure that we can manage the traffic and the public transportation and keep it at least the way it is? And do the pros really outdo the cons in this type of situation?
Well, life's about choices. Leadership's about choices. And I think the choice to have an economic engine built is worth the cost. It's not free. Not free, as you mentioned, there will be traffic. I think we have to do things to mitigate it. I've suggested ways to mitigate it further. So my proposal for light rail down the 10, light rail in the 405, the 101, all indirectly will help mitigate that issue. But take a step back for a moment. We're the second biggest city in the country. I'm asked, because of my role in that, talk about the NFL stadium. The story that hasn't been written yet is that's the only big thing going on in Los Angeles. That's stunning. That's a staggering indictment. So I'd like to see it done, but boy, I'd like to see 10 other things like that done, some of which will be infrastructure, some of which won't, some of which will add traffic, some of which will take away from traffic. But if we can't make this a place where big things, where we can dream and change the face of our city, the outcome's not going to be very bright. So I want to see us have a bioscience center at USC. I want to see us have one here. I want to see us do things like that, which are going to create employment opportunities for people in this room and elsewhere. We have to.
Yeah. Rams or Chargers?
I'm sort of a Charger fan. I don't need to see the Raiders come back, that's for sure. Yeah. Hey, listen, I grew up in Michigan, so you grew up in Michigan, the Lions are inevitably eliminated about halfway through the season. You can pick a second team. It's the first in 25 years, so I'm the eternal optimist.
Well, they got the Red Wings.
Thank you.
Yeah.
16 games in a row at home. It's not too bad.
So, Dodgers or Angels?
Dodgers. But again, I'm ultimately a Tiger fan, I gotta say.
That's not going to win you any votes, man. It's like...
The Tigers are eliminated by the All-Star game as well, so I got plenty of time to come back and root for the Dodgers. And I'd like to see, by the way, that change in ownership, and I hope we have owners who care about the community. Mm-hmm. The missing piece in all of this discussion has been the role the Fernandos have played and other people like that in the community. Yeah. That's the missing piece. So I'd like to see an owner who really cares about the community.
Lakers or Clippers?
Can I say Pistons?
Oh, man. I think the mayor's race for Detroit's up too, coming up pretty soon.
No, I like what the Clippers, for the first time, certainly in a long, long time, the Clippers are on the rise and the Lakers are on the descent. But I wouldn't count out Kobe Bryant in any cat fight, that's for sure.
Fatima?
Hello, how are you? My name is Fatima, and I'm a senior political science and urban studies double major. And you've mentioned tonight some of the strategies that you want to implement to create more jobs in LA, but how do you specifically plan to create more jobs that pay workers a living wage? As we've seen throughout the nation, jobs are being replaced, but workers are getting wages that are significantly less than a living wage.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I think that for those who don't regularly look at the New York Times, I think you should look at an article a couple of weekends ago. It's either on the front of the business section or the front page of the paper where they talked about the iPhone 4 and why it's not made in the US. And it's not because of currency, it's not because of wage rate, it's because in China they could find a sufficient number of manufacturing engineers to help it get done. So if we're going to create good paying jobs, manufacturing jobs, we've got to do things differently. I put forth a specific proposal when I was in the city to try to bring electric bus manufacturing to Los Angeles. When I was in China, I learned something that the Chinese are shifting their policy from cars to buses because the batteries are very expensive for a car, but in a bus, if you get enough miles, it's cheaper. So the light went off for me. I said, okay, cheaper for the riders, that's a good thing. That's a good place to start. Cheaper means our dollars go further. Now, if we took the buses just in MTA, so the 2,300 buses switched to electric, it's like taking 80,000 cars off the road. That's good.
In terms of pollution.
In terms of pollution. Yeah. But the real important piece is the jobs. Right now, there are no scale manufacturers of electric buses anywhere in this country, and they won't get shipped in from China. They're too expensive. They don't fit in those car carriers. So there will be an electric bus manufacturer in the US. I came back, I said, hey, we should get in this game. So there's an RFP just now put out. Took them a year, took too long. The idea is let's test them, let's make sure they work, they are cheaper, they're safe. But if Los Angeles could be the first in, we'll make them not only for Angelinos, we will sell them to Alabama and Minnesota, for instance. Every bus now driven in Los Angeles is made in Alabama and Minnesota. No jobs here. So to create the economy of the future that has high-paying, good manufacturing jobs, more than a living wage, we're going to have to do things like that. Lean forward, look and imagine the future instead of in the past. In the past, we switched to compressed natural gas buses made in Alabama and Minnesota, no jobs for us. If we imagine things like electric buses, we can lead the country and we can be the supplier for the rest of the country and create good jobs.
Yeah. Labor unions in Los Angeles have become significant players in economic, political, and social policy. Do you expect to get the endorsement of the labor unions?
Oh, I don't know whether they'll endorse me or not, but I think any mayor to be successful has got to bridge the gap between business and labor in this community. For those who, again, are avid readers, Los Angeles Magazine wrote an article about me. And there's a quote from a woman named Marilena Durazo, who's the head of the County Federation of Labor, very highly regarded and important person in the labor movement. She's quoted as saying she's used to, that it was different when I came, because she's used to people coming in her office and making excuses why things can't get done, but I just got things done. She's further quoted by saying is I'm the first person she'd call to talk about city business. So I think I have her confidence and trust. I think I have the confidence and trust of the business community. And they're both going to have to behave a little bit differently if we're going to be successful. This is not about the divide between business and labor. It's about working together to change things.
Hi, my name is Steven. Thank you for being with us this evening. You slightly touched about it earlier and in your last response about the internal city and the industry that left the internal city, and then some of the conditions for a riot still possibly being, here in Los Angeles. So I was wondering if you could kind of say, your plan for, perhaps returning industry into Los Angeles, which you kind of were saying about the buses and stuff, and for somehow solving or further solving some of the possible conditions for another riot.
So in terms of getting manufacturing here, manufacturing's been leaving Los Angeles, but LA and LA County is actually still one of the top manufacturing centers in America, contrary to popular belief. But it has been leaving. To get people back, a big manufacturing, we're going to have to subsidize them, give them land or do something. What's the general strategy in terms of getting
I don't
large...
agree with your premise that we have to subsidize them. I don't. The bus example I gave you is free. Do we just have to lead? We have to see what the future looks like.
I understand when you say it's free.
But we're going to buy buses anyways. We can buy them from Alabama and Minnesota, or we can buy them from a manufacturer here. We're not going to subsidize the purchase of those buses. So I disagree with the notion that we're going to have to give away free land.
But such a company doesn't exist right now. An electric bus manufacturer does not exist in the United States.
That's right. That's where the jobs are going to come from, though. The notion that we're going to get someone who's left, GM left Van Nuys 20 years ago. Goodyear left South Los Angeles 25 years ago. They aren't coming back.
Right.
So we can pretend, we can say, well, let's find Goodyear and
yeah,
offer a big
I'm in
check.
agreement with you on that about let's not go after those that left.
Right.
Okay. But I love the example of the electric bus.
Right.
That company does not exist.
That's right.
For someone to do a startup.
No, it's not going to be a startup. Okay, it's going to be a manufacturer. There are manufacturers around the world. Copenhagen is transitioning its fleet of 1,500 buses to electric. They're halfway through. Shenzhen, China has 300 electric buses on the road. There are big companies already.
So it would be a foreign company that would then...
Could be a U.S. company.
Okay.
Could be a U.S. company. But our own order alone will support a pretty sizable manufacturer, give them the scale to compete with the rest of the U.S. and sell a lot more buses outside of Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. But I think we have to think about a job of the future. And the notion that we're going to get those jobs by offering public money and subsidizing them, we're broke. We can't compete in that game. But we can compete by using the resources we have. I got a Chinese car company to come and put their headquarters in Los Angeles. I got them to come because I suggested to put their car in the airport so they could develop a brand. 60 million people come in and out. I got them to come because I said, our utility will install in your customers' homes in 7 days the charging equipment because we own the utility. So we're the only city that can permit it, roll a truck to splice the wire and inspect it. All those things cost us nothing. So I think we're going to have to find areas where we have that comparative advantage and bring those jobs to Los Angeles. We can't compete in the race to the bottom with money.
So one of the major challenges any mayor is going to face starting on July 1st, and you kind of briefly mentioned this, in that some of the major tough decisions have been put off.
Yep.
And you referenced it in terms of how we've been paying for police overtime, saying, hey, we'll pay you later. That bill's going to be due in 2013 when the new mayor takes office.
Right.
A lot of pension obligations that are going to be due during that time. The new mayor is actually going to face a tougher budget environment than the budgets that we've had, which have been very tough in the last couple of years. How do you, when you start thinking about the first couple of days, what do we expect you to do as mayor in the first 100 days in Los Angeles?
Well, you can expect a couple of things. The first thing is going back to jobs. I'm going to get business and labor together in one place and say, okay, guys, we all got to change the way we do things because we have to start getting on a path to rebuild our tax base, create jobs in Los Angeles. That's number one. Number two, as far as the budget goes, we're going to have to better communicate with Angelenos where we really are in a way everybody can understand in simple human terms why we have potholes. Okay, we don't have potholes because of bad winter. We have potholes because the tax money we paid over the last 10 years wasn't invested in our roads. Why do we have this IOU for law enforcement? It's because we weren't finding sufficient dollars to pay the police to do their work. Why was our fire department cut 20%? What the implications of that are. So we're going to have an honest conversation. And then we're going to have to present choice. The city attempts to do everything for everybody. The most concrete example I can give you is some publicly owned parking garages. The city talked about for 2 years whether to sell them or not, let the private sector do it more cost effectively, bring almost $300 million back to the city to be invested in education, law enforcement, infrastructure, somewhere else. Now, nothing happened. They chose not to do something because those particular, if you put any issue on the table in Los Angeles, there's a single constituency, 2 of the districts, the council people were close to the developers, and boy, we can't do anything to harm them, right? So nothing happened. Now, I think Angelenos deserve choices to be put in front of them in a clear-eyed manner to say, okay, we have these garages, we need to do this in infrastructure, this in education, this in public safety. Angelenos should decide. Now, we could have a pretty robust debate this evening on education, public safety, transportation, which is first. I think I know what comes in last, which is the public parking. So we start with transparency, we inform Angelenos, they'll help us make the right set of choices. We're going to have to shrink. The city's not going to be able to do everything it used to do, but it still has to provide those core services.
So in essence, you're saying parking is not an essential service for a city. The private sector can easily provide that,
right.
and let them do that.
Yep.
And one would ask, why did we get into that to begin with? But are there other areas where the city is involved and it's not an essential service? For instance, would you be willing to sell, and there's been a lot of debate about this in the last week, LAX or LAWA, the airport authority, owns the Ontario airport. Would you be willing to sell that airport back to Ontario?
No, I think our infrastructure is a long-term comparative advantage. Imagine a city of the future where Ontario is connected to downtown by rail, so quick access. Imagine where LAX is as well, and imagine a city growing, continuing to be prosperous, where we have international flights landing in Ontario, domestic flights in LAX, everybody being well served. So I think it's too strategic for Los Angeles to give up in the short term. Now, does that mean it's well run? Does that mean we're getting everything we can out of it? No, that's a different set of issues. But when you start selling the old adage, sell the family silver, to pay the bills today, you're going to not be in good shape down the road. So I wouldn't sell Ontario.
So one thing that we didn't discuss is in your resume, it talks about you working for the Clinton State Department
right.
in Russia.
Yep.
Okay, what's that about?
Well, I was offered an opportunity at a young age to go to Russia and be part of a U.S. team to help Russia transition to a market economy.
So this is when the wall fell and
this is 94, 96, 3 years, Yeltsin on the tank and everything else. And it was just a tremendous life experience. We're involved in everything from decommissioning nuclear weapons to seeing Russia transition to a market economy. Certainly at a young age, it was a great learning experience for me. I'd say probably one of the most important things I learned just on my second day in the job. I was asked to visit someone who's then the mayor of St. Petersburg, who's thought to be a reformer. And we wound up in a heated discussion on why business needed to make a profit. After 10 minutes, he was kind of red in the face, so I changed the subject to actually the Red Wings and hockey because I didn't want to lose my job, and I'm all of 33. And I turned to my interpreter after I leave the meeting, and I said, just what do you think I was trying to say? And he said, it's simple. When you profit from someone is when you take advantage of them. Okay, the Soviet system, they didn't have the economic profit, sales more than costs. They only had the kind where you take advantage of someone. So of course, he was sitting there telling me, you shouldn't take advantage of people, and I'm saying you should, but we were both talking past each other. Now, the second part of life, so I figured, well, I better go back and make amends. I went back the next day and met his deputy, a guy named Vladimir Putin, who's gone on to some acclaim in Russia. Now, he got the profit thing entirely. Let's just say he's made sure along the way he's shared in those profits.
So if you could be part of the Soviet command economy communist country becoming a market democracy, how tough is it to change LA?
The advantage we had in Russia is they knew they needed to change desperately. The challenge here is convincing Angelenos that we do need to change, that we have all the tools and resources here to be successful, but that the single most important piece is to come together. All walks of life, all neighborhoods, all faiths, all races, all parts of the world, to say, okay, we have a common identity. We need to be at the same table. There's one table where we're all represented, and to come together. And I think that's a great challenge we face right now, but I think we can do it.
Okay. Hey, Austin Beutner, thank you for coming to Loyola Marymount University.
Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate it.
Thank you.